Previously, we paused our narration of Magus Incognito's The Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians, Part 3, with this world's soul is spoken of in the second aphorism as the germ within the cosmic egg, inasmuch as it is regarded as the tiny germ within the egg, which gradually increases in size and complexity and takes upon itself form and activity. Now, the symbol of the cosmic egg, of which the world's soul is the animating germ, is a very old one, and one widely spread in uses in the ancient world. As a prominent occultist has said, quote, "Whence this universal symbol? The egg was incorporated as a sacred sign in the cosmogony of every people on the earth, and was revered both on account of its form and its inner mystery. From the earliest mental conceptions of man, it was known as that which represented most successfully the origin and secret of being, the gradual development of the imperceptible germ within the closed cell, the inner working without any apparent outward interference of force, which from a latent nothing produced an active something, needing not save heat, and which, having gradually evolved into a concrete living creature, broke its shell, appearing to the outward senses of all a self-generated and self-created being. It must have been a standing miracle from the beginning." The secret teaching explains the reason for this reference by the symbolism of the prehistoric races. The first cause had no name in the beginnings. Later, it was pictured in the fancy of the thinkers as an ever-invisible bird that dropped an egg into chaos, which egg became the universe. Hence, Brahm was called Kalahansa, the swan of eternity, which laid at the beginning of each Mahamantara a golden egg. It typifies the great circle, or O, itself a symbol for the universe and its spherical bodies. The first manifestation of the cosmos in the form of an egg was the most widely diffused belief of antiquity. It was a symbol adopted among the Greeks, the Syrians, Persians, and the Egyptians. In the Egyptian ritual, Seb, the god of time and of earth, is spoken of as having laid an egg, or the universe. Ra is shown like Brahma, gestating in the egg of the universe. With the Greeks, the Orphic egg was a part of the Dionysiac and other mysteries, during which the mundane egg was consecrated and its significance explained. The Christians, especially the Greek and Latin churches, have fully adopted this symbol and see in it a commemoration of life eternal, of salvation and resurrection. This is found in and corroborated by the custom of Easter eggs. From the egg of the pagan Druids to the red Easter egg of the Slav, a cycle has passed, and yet, whether in civilized Europe or among the abject savages of Central America, we find the same archaic primitive thought, if we only search for it and do not disfigure in the haughtiness of our fancied, mental and physical superiority, the original idea of the symbol. End of quote. The concept of the world's soul is in some form of interpretation and under some one of many names may be said to be practically universal. Among many of the ancient schools of philosophy, it was taught that there was an anima mundi, or world soul, of which all the individual souls were but apparently separated, though not actually separated, units. The conviction that life was one is expressed through nearly all of the best of ancient philosophies, and in fact, in subtly disguised forms, may be said to rest at the base of the best of the modern philosophies. In the philosophical concept of the Logos, we find another and more advanced form of this same fundamental concept. The term Logos first became prominent in the philosophy of Heraclitus of Ephesus, where it appears as the law of nature, objective in the world, giving order and regularity to the movement of things. The Logos formed an important part of the Stoic system of philosophy, the active principle abiding in the world they called the Logos, the term being likewise applied to the universal productive cause. An authority on the history of philosophy has said of the concept of the Logos, quote, "The Logos a being intermediate between God and the world, is diffused through the world of the senses. The Logos does not exist from eternity like God, and yet its genesis is not like our own, and that of all other created things. It is the first begotten of God, and is for us imperfect beings almost as a God. Through the agency of the Logos, God created the world. End of the quote. In the philosophical concept of the demiurge, we find another form of the same fundamental concept. The demiurge was the name given by the Platonian philosophers to an exalted and mysterious agent by whom God was supposed to have created the universe. He was akin to the nature god of the pantheists and to the living nature of other schools of philosophy. The demiurge was the life of the world, or universal life, of which all the innumerable lives of finite creatures are but sparks in the flame or drops of water in the ocean. And yet, in its true sense, the concept of the demiurge was not identified with that of God, but was rather a concept of the first great manifestation of God, by means of which he creates and sustains the world. The idea of a universal will, a primal manifestation of God existing at the heart of nature and operating to build up and sustain the universe, is found in many modern philosophies. Cudsworth, the English philosopher, has sought to indicate this conception in his idea of plastic nature, of which he says, quote, "It seems not so agreeable that nature as a distinct thing from the deity should be quite superseded or made to signify nothing, God himself doing all things immediately and miraculously, from which it would follow also that they are all done either forcibly and violently or else artificially only, and none of them by any inward principle of their own." Well, this opinion, continuing the quote, is further confuted by that slow and gradual process that in the generation of things, which would seem to be but a vain and idle pomp or a trifling formality in the moving power, if the moving power were impotent, as also by those errors and bungles which are committed where the matter is inept and contumacious, which argue that the moving power be not irresistible, and that nature is such a thing as is not altogether incapable, as well as human art, of being sometimes frustrated and disappointed by the indisposition of matter. Whereas an impotent moving power, an omnipotent moving power, as it could dispatch his work in a moment, so would it always do it infallibly and irresistibly? No ineptitude and stubbornness of matter being ever able to hinder such a one, or make him bungle or fumble in anything. Continuing the quote, "Therefore, since neither all things are produced fortuitously or by the unguided mechanism of matter, nor God himself may be reasonably thought to do all things immediately and miraculously, it may well be concluded that there is a plastic nature under him, which, as an inferior end, a subordinate instrument, doth drudgingly execute that part of its providence which consists in the regular and orderly motion of matter. Yet so as there is also besides a higher providence to be acknowledged, which, presiding over it, doth often supply the defects of it, and sometimes overrules it, for as much as the plastic nature cannot act electively, nor with discretion." Well, end of the quote. Other schools of philosophy, notably that founded by Schopenhauer, have postulated the presence of a universal spirit whose chief attribute is desire-will, from whom the universe of creatures has proceeded. This universal spirit is held to be filled with a longing, craving, seeking, striving desire to express itself in phenomenal existence. Schopenhauer calls it the will to live. It is described as instinctive rather than intellectual, and as creating intellect with which to better serve its purposes of self-expression. Other philosophers have proceeded along the main lines of the concept of Schopenhauer with various modifications. The same idea is expressed by some of the old Buddhistic philosophers, the very term the will to live being used to express the essential nature of the universal spirit. But it must be noted in such philosophies the universal spirit is considered rather as the eternal parent than as its first manifestation. In the same way, a certain school of thinkers postulate the existence of a living nature, which expresses itself in innumerable living creatures and things, all things in the universe being held to possess life in some form and degree, as indeed the Rosicrucian creatures also hold. But it must always be noted that in the secret doctrine of the Rosicrucians, the world's soul is not regarded as the infinite reality, but merely as the first manifestation thereof, from which all subsequent manifestations proceed and into which they are finally resolved. The world's soul is not eternal, but on the contrary, appears and disappears according to the rhythm of the cosmic days and nights. In the following video, we will continue with part 3 with the sentence. The second aphorism states, "The flame is rekindled."